This fall, the project team, comprised of members of Favorite Stars and other community members and members of the Georgia Southern faculty, staff, and students, have been researching the background of Irk Russell. And our primary research method, we've been talking to people, right? Gathering their stories about their memories and their lasting impact that Irk has had on them. And today, out of all of the wealth of stories that we've gathered, we've chosen just 4 to share with you today, to give you the sneak preview of what oral history interviewing is about, and to let you in on the conversation that we're hoping to have in this community collaborative project. And to that end, immediately after the performance, we are going to have, and invite you to stay for, a talk-back session where you can ask questions of the performers, you can talk about the process, and I prepared a few questions for the performers too that maybe they're prepared for, maybe they're not, to get the conversation going. Right, so the performance itself is 30 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation, and then after that, we're invited to have a casual conversation over refreshments. Without further ado.
Hi, my name is Rachel Godby, and the following is an excerpt from a pre-interview I had with Sandra Prince, who was a cheerleader during Coach Russell's Georgia Southern years. This phone conversation took place on October 12th, 2007. Hi, Sandra? Is this still a good time for the pre-interview? Okay, great. Well, what's going to happen is I'm going to ask you a few questions about Irk Russell and Georgia Southern, and from there I'll determine what kind of information I want to ask you during our formal interview, which is going to be taped. Okay? Great. Well, Sandra, what years did you attend Georgia Southern? Well, it was 1983 to 1989. I guess you could say I tried to make a career out of going to college. We had so much fun back then, no one wanted to leave back in our heyday. No, I wasn't really familiar with Statesboro before Irk Russell arrived, but I could definitely see a difference when he was here, mainly in the student body and in the community. I guess if I had to describe Irk Russell, I'd describe him as a dichotomous figure. He had a sweet old man side, but he had a bark that could bring down the biggest defense tackle. A true force no one dared to reckon with. I looked up to Irk Russell, respected and worshipped him. We all did. Back in the day, Irk Russell was a god. Albeit strange, beautiful Eagle Creek was exceptionally important to us. I still remember the ritual of Irk going to the creek to get water to take away on our away games. He would sprinkle them on the field before we played. This was a serious matter. Irk and the rattlesnake seminar? I remember that. Sadly, yes, there was a drug problem on campus, and it did filter into the sports. There are many parties I remember that I would leave early, specifically because of the drug problem. I have specific references, but I'm not sure I'd like to state those on the record. GATA shirts? Oh yeah, they're still around. I think they've endured because of the tremendous impact that Irk had on Statesboro and Georgia Southern. And those shirts keep Irk and the players in our hearts and our minds today. Back then, Irk and the players were like celebrities. I still can't believe I was so fortunate to be there during such an important time in Georgia Southern's history.
Hi, my name is Tina DeZanis, and I interviewed Jane Cage on October 2nd, 2007 at her home, which is quiet and secluded. We still see those T-shirts with the letters GATA, which means get after there, and that's the A word used with anatomy. Yeah, Irk's wife used to tease him about that. People would approach him, and he'd say, it simply means get after their anatomy. Yeah, once a luncheon or a foundation, he told his audience, and he said that the letters G-A-T-A means get after their assets. Yeah, the football team had a pretty good idea what that A word was too. They said, you have to be there, you have to go for it. You can't just sit back and play man's pants, you've got to go for it. Yeah, you still see those t-shirts with the letters G-A-T-A on them, not just around Statesboro. When the football program first began at Georgia Southern, we weren't any kind of conference, but there was no rules for artificial noisemakers. So here I was yelling and screaming and losing my voice. And so my father went out and got me an electronic megaphone. It had musical notes on it. It was kind of like our band at away games. So here I was playing the fight songs. Here we go, Eagles, here we go, and go, Georgia Southern. The fans would cheer. But in home games, the fans didn't appreciate it. Here I was sitting in Section D, standing and yelling, using my electronic megaphone. And one time, someone tried to bribe my brother to steal it away from me. So finally, one day, a lady came to me and said that she and some other ladies had been talking about it. And they said, we think you'd feel more at home on the student side. So I decided to go over there. And I stood right in the middle of the front yard and started yelling. And soon some other people decided to join me. And one of those people that came to join me was David Galasso, a student at the time. And he said, hey, look at that crazy lady. So here we're standing and yelling together. Well, our group grew, and we had a great time for many years. But eventually, as we were getting older and married and having kids, we decided it's time to go home. So here we were, right in Section D, standing and yelling. Finally, someone approached Roger Inman, I did a little bit for Georgia Southern, and asked him, can you please make those people sit down? He looked over there and said, no way, no way. So now the people expect us to be there. David waving his flag, and me in my blue sequin hat.
Good afternoon. My name is David Murkison, and I had the opportunity to interview Mr. Perk Robbins. I interviewed him at his house October 23rd, and also had a number of phone conversations before and after that date. And I'd like to present to you what we talked about. Irk Russell was my best friend. I'm sure lots of people considered Irk as their best friend. Irk was one of my personal heroes. The words nice and good are simple, but they more than anything described Irk Russell. He had a philosophy for his team, and it was do right. He lived it, and he expected his players to live it as well. I was there at the hospital when he died, along with Gene and Tim Durden, and Coach Van Gorder was there. About a month before he died, I got a handwritten letter from him. And since I spend my summers in Michigan, he had told me he was going to write me each week and give me updates with the crew from Snookies and the football off season. Well, he started this letter by saying that he was 8 weeks late in starting to write me the letters. I remember when I first met him, it was 1973. I had just started at the University of Georgia as the Vice President for Advancement in University Relations. I was at my first ever Georgia game, and I was up in the president's box, and I was looking down on the field, and I saw this guy headbutting his players. And he would keep doing this until blood was running down his forehead. And I asked President Davison, who is that bald guy down there? What is his deal? President Davison said, that happens to be Irk Russell, and Irk Russell is the greatest defensive coach in America. At home, I have this football. I have it signed by the 4 best players at the University of Georgia. Charlie Trippi, Frank Sinkwich, Fran Tarkington, and Herschel Walker. Later, I asked Irk Russell to sign it. He didn't feel he was on the same level as those players, But I told him it was important to me and that I felt he was, so he did sign it. Broke my heart when he went to Georgia Southern, but I knew he would be successful. But even I didn't know how successful he would be. In 1988, when I was offered the job of vice president for advancement at Georgia Southern, I got a long-distance phone call. And the voice on the other end said, "Perk, this is Irk. You are going to love it here, and you need to take this job." Now, that was just icing on the cake. Being closely associated with Irk Russell was one of the highlights of my entire life. When I got to Georgia Southern, I had told Irk I was going to wear my Georgia ring until he had won another national championship at Georgia Southern. My first trip when I got to Georgia Southern was to Pocatello, Idaho. Now, I had no idea where Idaho was, much less Pocatello, but we should have won another national championship. We went out there and lost to Furman in the last seconds when one of our star players fumbled the ball. It was very depressing. And what made it even more depressing is while we were out there is when the University of Georgia contacted Irk to be the next coach for the Bulldogs in Athens. We got back from Pocatello and the fans were holding up big signs that said, "Don't go, Irk." Well, luckily he didn't go. He stayed one more year and he went 15-0 and he won his third national championship, and that was one of the highlights of Irk's career because no one had ever gone 15-0 before. It's also when I got my ring. Now, after Irk retired from coaching, President Henry and I asked him to chair our $18 million capital campaign, and he was a great chair. He certainly had the GATA slogan of "Go after their assets for those." He would always attend. He attended all 18 of our kickoff dinners, and he would start off with the same joke. He would start off by saying, "Is there anybody here from Clemson University?" And with a big crowd, which he always drew, someone was always from Clemson. So he said, "You may not realize this, but Clemson University, a long time ago, used to be known as Clem University." They decided, the students and the faculty and the alumni, that that was not a very sophisticated name for this institution. So they had this 2-year competition and they decided to rename it and add an S-O-N. And at Clemson University, the S stands for chivalry, the O stands for honor, and the N stands for knowledge. We had a very successful campaign because of Irk Russell.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan Tyson, and on November the 11th, I had the pleasure of interviewing Bruce Young about Coach Russell, and this interview took place at Bruce's office at one of the great Statesboro landmarks. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, Snooki's. You know, if I had to describe Coach Russell to someone who didn't know him, my starting point, I think, would be that he was a football coach. I mean, that's the way most people knew him. But really, he was more than that. He was the most unique individual I've ever seen, in that whoever he was talking to, at that point in time, that person was the most important person to him. Now, I've seen him sit around on numerous occasions and talk to people. And at that particular time, that conversation was the most important one that he was involved in. You know, if I had to describe Coach Russell physically, well, he was ugly. No, he was a man's man. I guess the one trait that he was most identified by was his bald head. If you'd only heard of him, you really would think he was 8 or 9 feet tall, but really he wasn't. He was just a normal, average person. I really don't think he realized what a big person he actually was, or what a big legend he actually was. In fact, if anything, I think it embarrassed him. I traveled with him on numerous occasions, and he was almost like traveling with a rock star. People loved him, and they were drawn to him. I never saw or never heard him say anything negative about anybody. and I never heard anybody say anything negative about him. He treated everybody special. He crossed all socioeconomic lines, all racial lines, any lines that society could draw. He treated everybody the same. Sometimes I just sit back in awe. I met Coach Russell in 1965 at the University of Georgia. And at that time, I knew him as a football coach. Back then, your coaches were your coaches, and the players were your friends. But over the next 15 years, as I'd go back to Athens on special occasions, he always remembered my name, and he always asked me about my family. Because of the respect I had for him, until the day he died, I never called him Irk to his face. And even today, in most conversations, I still refer to him as Coach Russell. When he moved to Statesboro in 1980, Snoopy's was just a place he could start his day. We both loved practical jokes, and the coach-player relationship over the years became a close friendship. After 25 years, I knew him so well that writing the eulogy at his funeral was the easiest thing I ever had to write. But by far the hardest I ever had to deliver. I really didn't think I could do it. To say the success of the football program was instrumental in the growth of Statesboro, Bullitt County, and the college, well, that somewhat be stating the obvious. I mean, no doubt the excitement of football. I mean, look on my walls out there. All the major magazines, Sports Illustrated wrote an article about it. The television stations would come in and just turn my restaurant into a studio. They interviewed him all the time. It was nothing. People got used to it. Coach Russell's name gave instant credibility to it. And his personality gave it the reality that it was something special. I remember one day he was sitting around this table, and he looked out the window and he said, "Men, you know, that would be a good place for a practice field." And it just so happened that Wayne Johnson, who was in the irrigation business, and Joe Smallwood, who was in the grassing business, were sitting here at the time, and they got to talking, and the next thing you know, we had a practice field. It was kind of fun to watch, really, because everybody wanted to be a part of it. If there's one thing that maybe a lot of people didn't know about Coach Russell, it was that he was a very intelligent individual. I remember when his book came out that in their haste to get the book on the shelves before Christmas, the publishers left a number of grammatical errors in the book. And that really bothered Coach Russell. I think that's the only time I ever really remember him getting mad about anything. He put a disclaimer in the book, and he pointed out all the grammatical errors, and he apologized for them. And he wouldn't let any books go out on the shelf without that disclaimer in it. I really think that's the only time I ever remember him being angry. Most perfectionists get angry at everything. He didn't. But if his name was tagged to something, he wanted it done right, and he wanted it to be the very best. Did I mention he was clever? He was always interested in some simple way to motivate his players. I remember he came in the restaurant one day and he said, "Bruce, I need a milk jug. I want to go over there and get a little bit of that Eagle Creek water to take on our road trip with us." And I said, "Well, Coach, it's raining out there. Why don't you let me get it for you?" And he said, "Nah, you'll just go back there and get some sink water. I want the real thing." So I go back in the kitchen, get an old milk jug and a coat hanger and give it to him. And I watch him as he walks across the practice field in the rain, climbs up on the bridge, lays down, and dips that Eagle Creek water into that milk jug. He took it to Northern Iowa to the playoff game, spread it all across the field. His players just went crazy. They loved it. And that's just one example of how he can motivate people, not only in football, but in life. If there's one thing I'd like people to know about Coach Russell, you know, most people think of him as a good football coach. But me, I think of him as just a good person. Look at the way he did things. The way he treated people. Everything he did was done right. Everything he did was done right. If he told you something, you could take it to the bank. And he never thought of himself as being somebody who was above anybody else. If you talk about these $4 million football coaches, if they were worth $4 million, he was worth $10 million. But that wasn't what he was in it for. He came to Statesboro and gave us everything he had to offer.
You know, in my opinion, he should be up there with Newt Rockne, Bear Bryant, Vince Dooley. He should be in the College Football Hall of Fame.
Coach Russell was a hero, not only to me and to the players, but to Statesboro and Georgia Southern football.
And living in Statesboro and the success of Statesboro was just as important to him as the success of the university and the success of the football program.
Go Eagles!
Go Eagles!
He was ugly.
He was dichotomous. He was sweet, great, had a bark.
He was my friend.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, it might take a little time for you to just sort of settle in, I understand that. But we really would like some feedback. Obviously, this performance is not a representation. We're not trying to portray in total the real person, the essence of the person. And if you have questions about the process, if you have feedback, does it feel right, or is that a little bit off? We'd really like to hear about it. And to start off the conversation, Rachel, I told you I would pick up. Now, you said that you interviewed Sandra Prince first as a pre-interview. Have you talked to her since? In the flesh? Did you actually visit in person? Did you gather some of your physical gestures from her?
Yes.
Yeah.
She does a lot with her hands. She spoke with her hands constantly. I hope I got some of that in there.
Does anybody in here know Sandra Prince? You ever met her before? Did the story and her gestures ring true? Could you see Sandra?
Sorta.
Sorta. If you talked to Sandra, would you go, boy, she just made a mess of you. Is there anything that Rachel could do to be more Sandra? If there's anything that you think of, we'd be happy to hear about it later. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I thought she did a good job. You're a good job.
Well, we've got it on tape, so we're going to show it to Sandra. So Sandra gets to have her 2 cents. Do you have a question for any of the audience members today?
How'd I do? My Kirk is here in the audience for those of you.
Kirk is here.
He already gave me a thumbs up, so I think I did.
Thank you so much for coming. Did he do all right? Of course we said no, he really. Did you recognize yourself?
Oh, he did better than I do. But Herc, I would just repeat, Herc was my hero, my best friend, and other people can equal me how much they loved him. His family is the only one that could love him more than I did. The rest of you can equal it, but you can't do better than that.
Well, I want to say that I haven't listened myself yet to the tapes. I was holding off on listening to the taped interviews because part of the process has to do with the give and take between the listener, the interviewer who really has to practice an empathic listening, and then creatively choose from a very long interview what they thought was important for the storyteller. And of course, what they thought might be interesting to an audience too. So there's that kind of control creative process going on.
And I will say, just with the conversations that I had with Perk, as well as Nick Henry, who I also interviewed, I could have been here 2 hours just based on that, especially what Perk had to say, because he had a lot of good stuff which we couldn't get in today. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask all of you guys. I know that we all sat and we talked about this very specific way of doing these interviews, but we also talked about the challenges of with such a big subject matter. Easily it could spiral off and become so many other different things. How hard was it for you guys to stick to, what you were trying to get at as an interviewer when this story is so big?
I think it was a little hard, interviewing Bruce Young, obviously he, along with Perk, was one of his best friends. And, I think that Bruce and I probably could have, if I'd given Bruce the opportunity to just sit and talk and reminisce, I mean, we could have been there, 3 or 4 hours probably.
And how long was the interview actually?
The interview was actually 5 questions and lasted probably 35 minutes.
So he was prepared for you.
He was.
He was, yeah. And that's one of the things that the process is. The pre-interview prepares the person to put themselves into the position as storyteller, knowing that full well that this is going to happen. That someone's going to perform them and tell their story. So, and you are. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And Perk and Bruce, they both knew him from their time at University of Georgia all the way till recently. So they had a lot of material, a lot of information about cases.
And you're good friends with Bruce as well. What was that like to interview your friend?
Well, it was fun. I mean, in reality, and of course, Bruce is not here to defend himself, but when Bruce mentioned that he met Coach Russell in 1965 at the University of Georgia, again, he's not here to defend himself. Certainly don't want to tell any secrets about his age, but I was only like 10 years old. And, Bruce really was one of my heroes. I mean, when the first Georgia game that I ever went to, Bruce played in it. And, from there, it's funny how over the years you kind of catch up to people in age. They seem a lot older than you at that time, and then all of a sudden you look around and you think, oh, we're about the same age.
Those phases start to meld together.
It was fun because, obviously Bruce and I have had numerous conversations, and it was easy for us to just sit there and be relaxed and laugh and have a good time.
Tina? I felt, to begin with, I was a little bit nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but once I started, the interview and all, I felt, at home, and I think it could, go on for hours and hours, but, I knew I had to stay on track, but it was really interesting just to hear, Jane's side of the story, because how she told it and everything, it just, it could have been a blessed book,
Now, is Jane here? I know she said she's going to try to make it. Who's here? Oh, hello. Thank you so much. That is the real blue hat. Thank you so much.
But, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it, just listening to what she had to say, and, it was just, most informative. And now I know more about her than I didn't know before I went to see her, so.
Jane, did you see yourself?
Yes, Tina does a good job of displaying a lot of enthusiasm, so.
Well, again, any kind of feedback that you can give us.
My wife is going to be singing at the pack in about 10 minutes, and so I'm going to go there so I can stay good with her. But, one thing that a lot of things I talked about that would be funnier, but we can't tell here. But the one thing I didn't say, and this is very important about her, is his family. I mean, everything that was good about her is good about his family. He loved them all, and they're just as good. They're in the same league that he's in. So it's a family thing, just like Bruce's is, and like I like to think my family is. But that was very important to her. But I do better stay good with part of my family.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who has to scooch out and be good with their family? I mean, you know, about the other performance.
Well, I don't think he's,
Jean's like that man's man.
I think he was handsome. And then really used to say that everywhere they went together, that he was like a magnet to women.
Now you see,
I think he was all that.
I don't imagine you would be.
Don't chastise Bruce very bad. I think he was actually saying that kind of
Oh,
sarcastically.
I
Do we have any other questions? Any questions about what's next, or the process, or anything that you'd like to see? Because you know that this is just the second phase of a process. We have more interviews to conduct. There's going to be script writing and the final stage performances until next fall. So really, any kind of feedback or input you have at this moment is so valuable. Well, you can visit. We will take questions on the side and comments on the side privately as well. Of course, this is an ongoing feedback process. And we thank you so much for coming. And Tim?
Well, we can't have anything here at the Emerson about food and drink. So we do have just a small reception. Don't get too excited. But a small reception in the youth gallery immediately following our event here. I do want to mention, though, just from a timeline standpoint, the auditions for the play will be in May. And then the production of the play will be the week before the Eagles march off to Athens to play the University of Georgia in the fall. A little bit during the week before that show, during the week before that show, and then it'll be at George Stone's family the week after. That's our timeline. Okay.
We hope to see you throughout. Okay, and yes, please talk amongst yourselves and with us. And there are a few other members of the interview team. And so hang on a little bit. Thank you so much.